Anybody believe that it'll go fastest? That's not really lying if you don't believe me. Paragraph 21. Is this to say that suffering is indispensable in the discovery of meaning? And again, this paragraph here, very important. Does this mean that you have to suffer to find meaning? No, in no way. I only insist that meaning is available in spite of suffering, provided that the suffering is unavoidable. So you can find meaning in suffering, he says, in spite of suffering, even then. Meaning that, think about all of the dangers of life, all the problems of life, you can find meaning in all of it. Well, what if I'm suffering? Even then. What if I'm suffering and it's not my fault? Even then. You can always find meaning in suffering. And so, if you can find meaning in suffering, now, start to work your way back. Can you find meaning in a stubbed toe? Can you find meaning even when you're sad? So the idea that you can find meaning even when, in spite of, not necessarily because of. And does point out that when the suffering is unavoidable. If it is avoidable, the meaningful thing to do is to remove its cause. For unnecessary suffering is masochistic rather than heroic. And you're going to see a divergence between Frankl and Nietzsche here. Nietzsche says embrace the suffering. Even seek it out because it makes you stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Frankl says, don't do that. If you can avoid suffering, avoid it. He refers to it as masochistic, somebody who enjoys pain. Don't be the person who enjoys pain. If you can avoid it, remove it. He says that suffering, unnecessary suffering, is masochistic, not heroic. So you have again a strong division there between Nietzsche and Frankl. If, on the other hand, you cannot change the situation that causes your suffering, you can still choose your attitude. Jerry Long had not chosen to break his neck, but he did decide not to let himself be broken by what had happened to him. So it's a truth. Do things happen to you in your life that cause suffering? Yes. One of the real terrors of life, maybe, is to understand that a lot of your suffering is caused by yourself. You do it to yourself. You make decisions in your own life. For example, even, I'll give you an example. We don't get to where we want to get to in life. And then we look back at our life at some point and go, man, like a good friend of mine is looking back at her life right now and she's thinking, man, I wish I had gone to college. And it's true. She does a great job with where she is. But she keeps thinking like, man, I need to go back to college. And she's in her late 20s now. But then she's also thinking, I'm too old now. I can't do it. And if she doesn't do it, she'll be thinking the same thing in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, and all of that. But why is it that we don't get the education that we want? A lot of us tend to think like, oh man, it's the school's fault, it's the school's problem. I don't know. I'm talking to you guys right now about this text that the test is on. And I told you I'm going to give you a chance afterwards to ask questions about the test and to complete it. And yet so many of you overwhelmingly are going through the test right now, not listening to a single word of what's going on. Is that society's fault? Is it because the school didn't prepare you for it? No, it's worthwhile asking yourself, what is it about you that thinks that you can, that you already have all the answers? If you had all the answers, by the way, wouldn't you have done it last time? I imagine so. Now again, it doesn't make a difference to me. I've already got my doctorate. It doesn't make a difference to the people next to you because they won't be the ones who are complaining in a few years about how school didn't prepare them for life. Or maybe they will. I don't know. But, and by the way, the point of this is not to chastise anybody. The point of this is to say, look at your own behavior there. This is one period of one day. How many times have we made decisions like that over the course of our academic career to then wonder at the end, man, how come I didn't learn anything? I have an idea why that might have been possible. But good news is that in the United States, you have an option after this. College, community college, the work world, all of these things are options, and you can learn in all of them. But how long are we going to go in our lives blaming others and other things? How come I didn't get this? How come I didn't get that? Before we have to realize that the cause of most of our own suffering is ourselves. The fact that we haven't cleaned our own rooms, as I say all the time. The fact that we look out at society and go, I can't clean my room because of all these things. You guys know where dust comes from?
Nuts.
Yeah, what's dust?
Oh, dust.
Onskin.
Yeah, a lot of times it comes from living things, organic things, like your skin flakes and all that stuff, and it's pretty gross. So why can't you keep your room clean? There's too many people in the world. So what do you have to do?
Kill them all.
Kill them all. Don't do that. But my point is that you see how something silly like that can take you to these extreme circumstances. Imagine if you really are bitter and envious and angry, the kinds of ends to which your imagination can take you. Don't miss that point. He's going to talk about that in the very next paragraph, 24. As for the concept, 23. In turning to the second aspect of the tragic triad, namely guilt, I would like to depart from a theological concept which has always fascinated me. He continues, crime in the final analysis remains inexplicable insomuch as it cannot be fully traced back to biological, psychological, or sociological factors. Remember, Frankl is going to say something very straightforwardly, and then he's going to say it academically as well. This is more of an academic thing. So he goes on to talk about prisoners in paragraph 23, especially in San Quentin. And we think about how it is that we talk about crime today. We say things like, what causes crime? We'll say these things like, well, poverty. Poverty causes crime, which is, look at the data. It's a silly, silly statement. But it's an attractive statement, because then if we commit crime, or we know people who commit crime, it's an easy escape. Well, it's not their fault. If you look at their socioeconomic situations, oh, and by the way, what's the cause of the socioeconomic situations? A lot of times it's the family life. So look at where they grew up, look at who their family was, look at their IQ they were born with, and you look at all of these things and you go, given all of that, could you have ever expected this person to turn out any other way? Think about the message that's being sent there. Who's the cause of that person's suffering? Not in that case. In truth, yeah. In truth, it's themselves. But in our minds, it's not going to be their fault. It's going to be a biological thing. It's going to be sociological factors. It's going to be everything outside of you. Now, again, there's an attractiveness that's there. That way, no responsibility for my own action. But there are no free lunches in nature. So what do you lose when you do that, when you adopt that stance? You lose the ability to fix your own life. Your life now cannot get better because all those things are still in place. Sociological factors are still in place. Socioeconomic factors are still in place. You still have the same kind of genetics that you had before. You're still from the same family. And we start to believe, therefore, that we have no power to make our own lives better. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to change society. But isn't society made up by the same... essentially you acknowledge that you're a damaged person. Why can't you fix your own life? Well, I'm too damaged. Well, then what makes you think as a damaged person you can fix society? That's a hell of a hard thing to do. If you can't even fix yourself, then of course you can't fix society. And if you recall, that's how this whole mess started in the first place. First semester, first text we looked at was called Fix Yourself. And this was essentially the assertion that we need to fix ourselves. And if you fix yourself, surprise, surprise, something interesting happens. Society gets better. You fix yourself, you fix yourself, you fix yourself, I fix myself. Now, of course, we can still take that stance. But even if we do that, other people aren't going to. So then we just kind of give back into, these are all excuses for not changing our behavior. And this is what he's talking about here in paragraph 23. That prisoners who've done terrible things, it's important to say, you've done terrible things. You should feel guilty about it. But you should feel guilty about it because you had control over it. If you had control over it, that means you can change it now, fix it now. Because you shouldn't feel guilty about things you don't have control over. But if you have that guilt, then that can motivate you in a positive way. Personal guilt for things I've done are an important motivator. You shouldn't let them destroy you. You shouldn't let them stop you from doing the things in life that you could do. You shouldn't wander around just thinking that you're a miserable piece of crap and that you can't do good. You can do good by fixing yourself. And then once you're fixed, surprise, surprise again, good things will come from you. And so in paragraph 24, he points to a similar idea. As for the concept of collective guilt, I personally think it's totally unjustifiable to hold one person responsible for the behavior of another person or a collective of persons. He talks a lot, especially in other places, about, again, as a Holocaust survivor himself, you would think, oh, he's pissed off at the Germans, right? He has every right to be. They were the people who went along with Hitler. They're the ones, and we tend to think about it that way. They went along with Hitler. Hitler didn't go door to door getting people to go along with him. He was tapping into something that was already inside of the German psyche. And then he exploited it, and then people went along with it because it was already in them. Nothing is going to come out of you that's not already in you. So you would think that if anybody has a right, or a good reason, you might say, to hold the German people responsible, and as guilty, it's a guy like him who survived the concentration camps. But he doesn't. He points out that you can't hold them responsible for the things that their parents did. You can't hold them responsible for the things that their ancestors did. And we have this, I pointed out last period, we have this tendency to look at people and we hate rich people. Why? Because they're rich. We hate them, why? Because they're a collective of people. Well, isn't there a rich person out there who does a lot of good and helps people? Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're rich, so they're just part of that group. So the individual actions don't matter. And we don't accept, and by the way, we hold that view in a lot of areas, but not in others. For example, last period I was pointing out, should you hold a person responsible for what their ancestors did? Should you hold a person responsible for what their parents did? If you believe that you should, then I have another question for you. What do you think we should do with people who were brought here as children and they're undocumented? Should we send them back? If you're saying no, because it's not their fault, well then you're running into the exact same problem then. But who cares what they did? It's what their families did. It's what their parents did. They're responsible for the things that their families have done, right? We're just not in that circumstance. There's something in us that, and then by the way, also you hopefully wouldn't be that person who says you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't stereotype people. Hopefully you wouldn't be saying that either. Because people who believe in collective guilt absolutely believe in stereotyping. They absolutely believe that you can judge a book by its cover. It's a shortcut to thinking, but it's a neat, tidy, easy way of going through the world without having to think. Because then you have to process people as individuals. It takes a lot of effort. And then, of course, once you realize that people are responsible for their own actions. And once you realize that those people are responsible for their own actions, what do you realize? I'm responsible for my own actions. No, screw that. You guys are oppressors. Kill them all. And you see this ideology manifest itself in every totalitarian regime, since the history of the world. This is exactly the thinking that you see manifest in the Soviet Union, in Cuba, and even in China, under Mao. And also as well as the Nazis. You look at the body count that was left in the 20th century by these ideologies, and it's staggering. And yet we'll turn around today and say, it just wasn't done right yet. All right, very quickly now. Paragraph 25, the third aspect concerns death, but it concerns life as well. At any time, at each moment, life is dying, and that moment will never recur. He says this is his imperative. This is his absolute statement. Live as if you were living for the second time, and had acted as wrongly as the first time you're about to act now. I wish there was a more concise way of saying that, because it's so powerful, but we can get lost in the words there. In every decision that you make, live as if you were living a second time right now. And then think back about the first time that you lived and all those mistakes you made. Think about how you would change those bad decisions. Because the truth is, most of us can change our bad decisions if we just stop and think for a second about the kind of decisions that we would make if we were living a second time. We can see the mistakes coming. In fact, he says the opportunities to act properly, the potentialities to fulfill a meaning are affected by the irreversibility of our lives. One of the things that makes life so wonderful is that we can't go back and live it. It's one of the things that makes it so precious. And he points here about old people. And we shouldn't pity old people because they don't have a list of opportunities. You might say, oh, but they don't have any future. No, but they've got the past. All of the things that we hope to one day do, old people have already done. So there is no, I think I'm going to do this, I think I'm going to do that, because none of us knows how our lives are going to end up. They've actually done it. So there is no like, hey man, maybe someday I can, they've already done it. He says that there's something more powerful in actually having done stuff than in the possibilities of maybe, hopefully one day doing these things. So again, very contrary to many of our views. And then finally, he sums the whole thing up. In view of the possibility, not the necessity, but the possibility of finding meaning in suffering, life's meaning is an unconditional one, at least potentially. Meaning that even if you can find meaning even in suffering, then that means you can find meaning anywhere. So if you can imagine being able to do that, and when you are suffering, to find a meaning in it, then that tells you can find meaning anywhere. So now all of a sudden, life has meaning. No matter the circumstances. No matter the circumstances. Well, why is that important? Paragraph 34. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of. we've seen the horrible things that people are capable of doing. And since Hiroshima, we know what's at stake. So since Hiroshima, we now know that we're capable of doing those terrible things. You know, if you lived 10,000 years ago and you wanted to wipe out humanity, you would have been very busy. It would have taken you a lot of time every day. You know, today, we can just kind of go, and with a few pushes of some buttons, we can wipe out all of humanity. That's the problem. The desire to wipe ourselves out is there. And since one thing we learned from Hiroshima, the use of the atomic weapon, is that we also have the ability to do it now. And so this is a warning from Frankl that we need to sort these things out. Because if we don't, that's the road that we're going to head down, self-destruction on a global scale. So, questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?